Hi, good morning. Today we will be talking about the two books of Samuel, the first and second book of Samuel. As we are so used to doing, there are still four things that we need to look into the lesson for today. We will be looking at the overview, and the structure, and the theme, and the key text to understanding these two books of Samuel. Okay, so hopefully the last classes, the last sessions that we had on Joshua and Judges opened up for you a thirst to know more what happens after the religious and moral decadence of the Israelites, when they didn't have any king, when there was chaos religiously and morally. Now they were searching for one to guide them, because when they left Egypt, they had Moses. When they crossed from Moab to the river of Jordan and into into the promised land, the Israelites had Joshua. After Joshua, there came a problem now. The problem then was that there was no one to lead them. There was no one to lead them, and so they are in a way doing their own thing. They were doing their own thing. So, in if you're going to look into the ending of Judges, and we were saying that the key text to understanding the book of Judges, that everyone, they were looking for a king. They were looking for a king because everyone did what he saw fit in his own eyes. So and also because there was a generation who didn't know anything about the God who saved them from the slavery of Egypt and the wonders he had shown them. Okay, these were the generations next to Joshua. So they didn't know anything about this God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So the problem at the end of the book of Judges is the wrong kind of leadership. There was no king. Okay, so everyone is doing what he thought is deemed worth doing. There was no one to guide them. So Samuel is providing the solution to that problem. Okay, and that is now the rise of the kingdom. So the key text for Samuel, although it's going to be discussed more later on, is that, and this is it's in 2 Samuel 7:19, and this commandment is an ordinance for the benefit of humanity. Okay, so establishing a kingdom, establishing a king, and choosing a king would be for the purpose of the benefit of humanity. The benefit of humanity. Although, if you're going to read through the book of Samuel and people were asking for a king, God said to Samuel, tell them that if they're going to choose a king, then the king will get their wives and their herds and their sons and their daughters, and the kings and the princes and the prince will be having their palaces while they would be out there working for the king. But still, they said, no, we want to have a king. So that's what they were asking for. Okay, they were asking Samuel to give them a king. So in a way, Samuel was the last judge. He was the last to guide the people before he anointed one Saul to become the first king. So the covenant of David was given as something that was going to ultimately be beneficial for the whole human race. I mentioned this in advance because the entire book of Samuel will be talking about David. Okay, the rise of the kingdom of David. The story of Solomon and the rest of his the divided kingdom, will be on the books of Kings. But here in the book of Samuel, it's the story of Saul and David. More importantly, the story of David. So, just to give us a learning objective, after reading the books of Samuel, you, okay, my students, will have an idea of how the books offer a solution to the religious and moral chaos provided or as a result in having no kings in the book of Judges. Okay, hopefully you'll take some time to read through the entire text of Samuel. Okay, so for you to have an understanding, a clear understanding of what was really happening, what was really happening in in the entire books. How what was the rise and the fall, the rise of Saul and the fall of Saul, the rise and fall of David. We will be, hopefully we can have a time to talk about David and, David and Jonathan, and then David and Bathsheba, all these stories inside, within the books of Joshua, Okay, as an overview, the book of Samuel is about the rise of the kingdom and provides a solution to the problem that we encountered at the end of the book of Judges. So at the end of the book of Judges, we know that they were looking for a king. There was no one to guide them. There was really religious and moral chaos. And if you're going to read through the book of Samuel, it's a very lengthy one. So because of the length of the book of Samuel, we need to, instead of going into, having to put structures in those entire books, we'll just have to look into the message altogether. Okay, the message I would say really is that the Lord is a great deliverer. He delivered the people from religious and moral chaos and into becoming, a kingdom. So the book of Samuel started with the prologue of Hannah's trouble, the mother of Samuel, and it's the same story of, if you're going to, the story of Samson, okay, the story of Sarah, barren women who had to give birth to great sons. So Hannah was delivered from her misery as as a barren woman. So in a way, if you're going to look into that, in the story of Hannah is as a prologue, it opens up the theme of the entire story, which is the story of, or the message, which is about hope. We're beginning to see now how the primary history spoke very poignantly and in the final form to people living in post-exilic community, because if they needed anything, as we know, these are written post-exilic, so they are now reflecting on what really happened. Why were they now in exile? So again, the world behind the text of Samuel still is a post-exilic era. Now they are hopefully back in the promised land after exile in Babylon, and now they were again reflecting on what was the problem of the kings before. Before we went into Babylon, before we were in exile in Babylon, what were happening with the kings before? Okay, so if you're going to see, many of the scholars will say that the books of Samuel were written in the post-exilic era. So the post-exilic era would be the time of Ezra, after the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So there was later on we'll be talking tomorrow we'll be talking about the books of Kings. So we'll have Solomon and the divided kingdom of the north and the south. Around 721 BC, the north was captured, and they were by the Assyrians. The fall of the north by the Assyrians, and around 500 something, 569 or 571 something BC, was the fall of the south. So the south, which they were in exile in Babylon, and we know, I've mentioned this so many times over and over again, that those who were brought into exile were the learned, the princess, the king, from the lines of the kings. They were the scholars, the educated, the rich families, because you're not going to be building a city out of those commoners. If you're going to want your city to flourish and to become great, you need to bring the minds of every nations that you have conquered. So they were in Babylon. So now, after the story of Ezra and Nehemiah, when the King Cyrus allowed them to go back to Israel, then they have to reflect what really happened. And now that they have to rebuild the temple, the second temple, the temple where the Jesus was, the Jesus visited. No, not the temple that was built by Solomon, because the temple that was built by Solomon was totally destroyed. It was totally destroyed. So at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, when they came back, then they were reflecting. They were reflecting on what happened. why did the king, why, I mean, what was the reason they get lost along the way? They had the rise of the kingdom in the time of David, the greatness in the time of Solomon. What happened during the divided kingdom? What happened, and why did, in a way, God abandon them? What was their sin? What was the sin of the community? Which it's these questions will be really answered, although it is within the books of Samuel and Kings. The answer to these questions would be on the prophets, like the prophets Ezekiel, Amos, although Ezekiel was in Babylon, but these are Jeremiah, Amos, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Hosea. So these are these questions that they were raising. What happened to us? Why is it that God has abandoned us? What are our sins now? What were the sins of the princes, the kings, and the leaders of the community? So these are the questions that they were raising. So when they were already in going back to the first two books of Samuel, it is the rise of the kingdom. Now they're reflecting again, okay, as the beginning of the Davidic kingdom. And as I mentioned, if you will have to mention about David and Jerusalem, these are written by the Zionists. These are those who really had to fight, or the Zionist theology. They had to, not the Zionists now, not the Zionists in the present age, but then those who are really trying to legitimize the kingdom of David. Okay, as to the structure, okay, the structure of Samuel. First Samuel has 31 chapters, and Second Samuel has 24 chapters. And the structure, although I mentioned, because it's a very lengthy book, okay, because it's a very lengthy book, we just have to divide them in such a way that we will have a grasp of what was really happening in those two books. So the structure, the prologue of Samuel. The second one is the creation of the monarchy. The creation of the monarchy really started with Saul. Saul is the first king of Israel, and then the rise and reign of David. Okay, so these are the entire, in a way, in a bird's eye view, the story of the book of Samuel. Okay, so we begin with Samuel being described as judging Israel. So again, Samuel was the last judge of Israel. While Samuel occurs in the book of Samuel, he's actually the last judge. In a way, it's still a continuation. Remember, when the ending of Joshua was continued in the first two chapters of the book of Judges. In the same way, now the ending of Judges, they are looking for the king, but the last judge is still part of the book of Samuel. So they are now needing for a king. Okay, so Samuel is also considered to be a prophet. He's Israel's last. He is one of the prophets after the judges. And Samuel is followed by, in 1 Samuel 8 to 12, chapters 8 to 12, Samuel was given the perspective of kingship. I want to go into the text, which we normally do. Let's go to the chapters 8. Now, so in chapter 8 of Samuel, first book of Samuel, when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. Okay, so again, he was the last judge, in a way, the legitimate judge. And then the problem is his sons were very abusive. The sons of Samuel were very abusive. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations." So again, they are needing a king. They're needing a king, and their gauge actually is that they were looking at other nations. So you can only imagine what God would be. We have to understand, okay, they're needing a king, but we know, going back in the story of Egypt, God really wanted to be in a way, their God and their king. No, he should be the one to guide them, not anyone else. So in as we continue, but the thing they said, you are old, and your sons do not follow, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to govern us. Let's see why. Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, so this is now the response of God. When people were asking for a king, this is now the response of God. Listen to the voice of the people in all they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Okay? So if you will be listening intently to this, then you will know how God felt. In a way, we are actually anthropologizing God. I don't know. We're making God like a human being because we put feelings into God. Okay, so listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, just as they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so also they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice only. You shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. So they were ruled by judges. When Samuel was dying, when he was too old, his sons were supposedly to follow him, but they were abusive. So the elders of the people said, no, we don't need any more judges. We want a king. We want a king like the rest of the nations, the neighboring nations. The neighboring nations, which supposedly in Deuteronomy chapter 8 should have been annihilated, right? No one should have existed at this point. But then going back into conquest and into conquest and coexistence, then they are now having problems and troubles along the way. So moving on to the readings, we say, so Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, these will be the ways. Okay, so but then what Samuel reported to them was not how God felt it. He did not report God saying, they have not rejected you, but they rejected me. What God wanted Samuel to tell them would be the ways of the king. So Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders of thousands, commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipments of his chariots. He will take your daughters for her to be perfumers and cooks. Okay? And okay, where am I? Sorry for that. So daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of their fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and best of your cattle and donkeys. To simply put, it's going to be an abusive king, a king who would be only thinking about himself. No? And he will take 1/10, and in that day, and he told them in advance, and in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer in that day. Okay? So they were already being, in a way, cautioned by God. Now, this is the kind of king that will be leading you. This will be the kind of king who will be with you. So, but the people, in verse 19 of chapter 8, but the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, no, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles. When Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice and set a king over them." Samuel then said to the people of Israel, "Each of you return home." So this was how it was when they first chose us, the first king. And we know that the first king was Saul, and then Saul became so insecure and all this, and after him was David. David, was adjective was that to whose heart is the same as that of God. The only one who received that kind of a praise, that his heart in a way beats the same as this God. Okay, that's how close David is, and how David was so loved or beloved by God. But there are also stories of David starting when he started to fall. Now, when he started to, we should be reading through. If you have time, you have to read through the story of David and Bathsheba. You have to read through the friendship of David and Jonathan. Okay, you have to see what kind of a father David was to his sons. Okay, so all of this are really part of the book of Joshua. No, the book of Samuel. So the book of Samuel, offer a ray of hope. There's now a hope for these chosen people of God. The recurring theme of the books of Samuel are praise, deliverance, and trouble. Always trouble, because they were already, informed by God. God already told them that this would be the kind of king that you will have. But then again, they still opted to have a king to guide them. So tomorrow we'll try to look into the story of the Book of Kings, and we'll see, the rise and fall of the kings, the rise of Solomon, and the divided kingdom of the north and the south. Good morning.